The title of my sermon is Why Do I Believe in God? Now that might seem kind of a strange topic coming from me, someone who's been an Adventist 30 years and been at the GC 27, 28 and an ordained minister for, I don't know, I have no idea how long, a long time, And yet maybe sometimes it's not so strange. Maybe it's not so strange because maybe sometimes it's good once in a while to take a look at your core beliefs, at your foundational principles, and to think about them again, and to think about what you believe and why you believe it, and maybe to make some adjustments and changes along the way. I could suppose in one sense I wrote this sermon as kind of that your way over there? Yeah. I suppose I wrote this sermon as kind of a defense against spiritual or maybe intellectual complacency, because we don't want to take our beliefs for granted. We don't want to take our relationship for God for granted, and it's easy to do. We need sometimes to think through what we believe and why we believe it. If not for our own good, then perhaps to do what Paul said when he talked about it, or what Peter said. He said, "Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready to give an answer to every man who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear." I mean, how well can you defend your faith? And that's what I want to do with this sermon, simply, is, if anything, help give an answer for the hope that is in us. Now, the title of my sermon isn't, "Why do I believe in Jesus?" or "Why do I believe in the second coming?" No, it gets a lot more basic than that, because, these are elements you really need faith for. Belief in Jesus, belief in the second coming, you really need faith for that. Now, I'm not denying that you need faith to believe in God as well. Of course, you need faith with that. But I'm arguing mostly that there are very powerful and logical and good reasons for believing in God, reasons grounded in good logical argument. In fact, I would argue that takes more faith not to believe in God than to believe in God. I would argue that the logic and reason in favor of belief in God is much stronger, much stronger than the argument, and beliefs against the idea of God existing. That's not saying the Christian God. That's not saying the God of the Bible. That's a whole different can of worms. But I'm just talking about the logic and reason for belief in God, why I think it's stronger than belief against. And that's what I want to look at, and that's what I want to share. Now, I want to start out with the story told by the famous Christian apologist C.S. Lewis. I assume most of you have heard of Lewis. I don't happen to be a C.S. Lewis fan. When he's good, he's good. When he's bad, I think he's just horrible, okay? But every now and then he just comes up with some interesting stuff, and I read stuff. I got my next talk that I want to talk about the existence of evil. I found the answer that helped me with understand evil from all people, Friedrich Nietzsche. Probably the greatest atheist of the 20th century, did more to answer the question for me of evil than any Christian writer I ever read. But that's the next sermon. I'm jumping ahead. But anyway, C.S. Lewis told a story, and it's kind of funny. He told about how he was a teacher at Oxford, and he was sitting in the teacher's lounge, and he was an agnostic, and he was sitting around in the teacher's lounge, and one of the other teachers said to him something like, and he said, "This guy who we call the hard-boiledest of all atheists I ever knew," he said, "this guy was the cynic of cynics." Okay? And they're sitting there, having a smoke, drinking their coffee, whatever they're doing. They might have even been drinking a beer then. I don't know. Maybe not on college time. But this guy was a hardcore atheist, and they're sitting in the teacher's lounge. And this guy says something to C.S. Lewis like, well, C.S. Lewis, old chap, there's an awful lot of evidence for the awful lot of strong historical evidence for the historicity of the Gospels. And then he just dropped the subject. And it would almost be like sitting there talking to someone, and he's saying, well, you're sitting there, you're having lunch with someone, and you're in the middle of a conversation, and the guy says, well, a flying saucer came down last night, scooped up my dog, and took him off in outer space. Pass the salt, and just drop the conversation and go on. Well, that's what happened with C.S. Lewis with this guy. This guy just dropped this bombshell on him. There's an awful lot of evidence for the historicity of the Gospels, and then moved on. And Lewis was floored because, if the Gospels are historically accurate, if there's evidence for the Gospel, and what they said really happened, that meant that there were miracles. There were supernatural divine miracles. And if you had the kind of worldview that Lewis had, he had the kind of worldview which said that there are no supernatural miracles, there are no divine miracles, then you run into a problem. For years, philosophers used to use the example of all swans are white. The empirical thing, all swans are white, on and on and on. You make an absolute statement, for 100 years they did it. Then one day somebody went down to Australia and they discovered black swans. And so suddenly the whole worldview based on all swans are white got completely knocked out, okay? Well, with Lewis, this just blew his mind. Because if you have a worldview that says there are no things as miracles, and then miracles occur, that obviously means your worldview is wrong. Okay? So anyway, now I use this story not as an apologetic, getting into an apologetic into the Gospels, but as an overarching introduction to what has represented basically two of the overarching views of the world. Two views that go back to ancient antiquity, way, way back. First, there's the materialistic, atheistic worldview. Goes back, we know, as far as the ancient Greeks, many of the ancient Greeks, the atomists, Democritus, Leucippus, and some of these others. Just basically the view, there's just atoms and the void. It's purely materialistic. You got it, that view back then, right up today, through the folks they call the new atheists, Richard Dawkins and other words and so on. No God, no creator. We're here purely chance creations out of, as I said, what one ancient Greek philosopher called the atoms and the void. The second view, in contrast to that, is belief in some sort of supernatural being or beings, okay? Anything from Zoroaster's Ahura Mazda, to Voltaire, who was a deist. Voltaire wasn't an atheist, he was a deist. To Calvin, predestinationism, and anything and everything else in between. Hercules, Zeus, whatever, anything in between. There's either worldview or any version of them Lewis knew negated the other. If one is true, the other's false. If there is no God, if there is no supernatural, then the other view, that's correct, or the other view is false. It's one or the other. Either God or gods exist, or gods don't exist, period. No middle ground. And my sermon, as my title rather unsubtly suggests, is that I believe in the view that God exists. So, why do I believe in God? Well, let's ask the question, let's push it back a little further. Okay? Why do I believe in anything, really? Why is there anything at all to even believe in? Why is there even a subjective consciousness like myself, able to believe in anything. Or, to get as basic as you can, I like metaphysics. I like to get to the bottom of things. I don't like to putz around on the surface of stuff. I've been at the GC 27 years. I still can't figure out a budget. I still don't know how to do the budget. I leave it in my treasurer and say, just what's the bottom line? What have I spent? What do I got to spend? What's the difference between the two? Skip all the rest. I don't want it. I just want to get to the bottom line of things. And I like this one philosopher. His name is Leibniz. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He lived in the 1600s, 1700s. He was a contemporary of Newton. In fact, they got in a big fight because each one got claimed to invented the calculus. And there's a big fight over history over which one really invented the calculus. But in the end, Leibniz asked a question. And I think this is the bottom line question about it. This is about as basic as you could get. Why is there something instead of nothing? Okay? If you can get a little bit more basic than that, let me know. Why is there something instead of nothing? Well, I think the answer obviously has to come from some version of those two views I talked about. Some version of either the atheistic, materialistic, secularistic, godless worldview, or it comes from some sort of supernatural, divine being who created it. The universe originated either through natural or supernatural origins. If the latter, the universe was made by a being, oh, please, I just love these. If the latter, the universe was made by a being greater to it and prior to it. Okay, remember I talked earlier about the universe? Whoever created the universe had to be greater than the universe and had to be prior to the universe. Okay, if it wasn't that, if there wasn't a being greater than the universe prior to the universe, then what is the other only option? Otherwise, creation had to have occurred naturally, out of itself. Okay, which leads to the question, think about this logically now. Because let's just get down to logic here. Let's put aside faith, okay? Though ultimately I got a whole talk on, if I don't know if I'll get to it, called math problem, where you need faith even in math. But if the universe ultimately came out of itself, it leads to the question, how did it first get there in order to arise out of itself? Can you see the point? How could it have created itself? That's kind of absurd if you really think about it. How does anything create itself without already being there? Okay, but if it's already there, then it didn't create itself. Can you see the point? I mean, it's pure, simple logic. These kind of get little mind game things, but how does something create itself? It was either there to begin with, then it didn't create itself, or you see what I'm saying? Now, there's only one alternative. There's only one out for that. And it's an out that people believe for a long, long time. Aristotle believed in, and it was believed for up until the 20th century. And it's the idea that the universe always existed, that the universe was eternal, that it always it was there from eternity. This belief was held by Aristotle, and it was held by many people up until the 20th century. It was the idea that it was just always here, it didn't have a beginning, it existed forever. Now, this leads, though, to some difficult philosophical problems, and I'm only going to just touch on one, and I'm not going to dwell into it because it's a little bit complicated, but if you think about it, it makes sense. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument, and it's an old medieval Muslim argument for the existence of God, and or for the fact that the universe had to be created. It's a little tricky. I'm just going to run through it quickly. It goes like this. Just grab the essential point. If you want to dig into it more, look up Kalam, K-A-L-A-M, Kalam cosmological argument, and you can see if you think it works or not. But it's the idea that if the universe is, it's the idea of an infinite universe is impossible. Because if the universe existed from infinity, from eternity, it would have meant that an infinite amount of time must have been passed in order to have reached this present moment or any moment. Okay, if it existed in eternity, you'd have to cross over an infinite amount of time to get to where we are. But how can an infinite amount of time or an infinite amount of anything have ever been completed? In other words, if the universe existed infinitely in the past, then an infinite number of moments must have been traversed in order to get where we are now. But if we can't even count in our heads to infinity, how can in reality, an infinite number of moments have been passed in order to get to where we are today? Okay? Think about it. Okay? It's a little complicated. But on the other hand, though, whatever the validity of that argument or whatever the weaknesses of that argument, it's pretty much been mooted by the Big Bang Theory as well. Okay? The Big Bang Theory has pretty much mooted that. According to the Big Bang Theory, the universe, once not existing, came into existence. And that's this idea that was once not a universe, and then it came into existence. And that idea really helped convince a man known as the world's most notorious atheist, Anthony Flew, in a creator. You know, a number of years ago, I was reading a book by a bunch of theists and atheists on the existence of God. Okay, and I was already a believer, so I don't care one way or the other about the arguments, you know. I mean, I know where I'm at, but it's always fascinating. And I remember reading this one atheist, and I thought, man, this guy is good. I mean, this guy is just taking these other people to shreds, one after another. I mean, this argument, I never read anybody this good. And I saw it, and I saw the name. His name is Anthony Flew, F-L-E-W. And I thought, wow, he's good. Flew's good. Like I said, I already had my experience with the Lord. It didn't bother me one way or another, because I think these things only work to a certain point anyway. Well, anyway, then it wasn't too long, about a couple years later, I picked up a book called There Is a God. And it was originally the way the title was, and they designed it that way. There is no God, and the no was crossed out, and an A was put in it. There is a God. And the subtitle was How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. And the author was Anthony Flew. Okay, and one of the things that changed Flew's mind about the existence of God was the idea of the Big Bang, the idea that the universe had a beginning. Because Flew said in the book that he just believed in the universe as, quote, a brute fact. Okay, close quote, a brute fact. Now, if you really think about it, that's awfully stupid. Okay, because, I mean, the universe seems to be an awfully complicated and involved state of affairs not to have any real explanation for it. You know what I'm saying? Just to say the universe is just there, you know, it's like saying this microphone is just there. It doesn't have to have any explanation. But he just accepted it as a brute fact. He wasn't going behind it. It was just there as, reality. Nothing behind it, no explanation. And he went on with that for a long time. And he said that he had simply taken, quote, the universe and its fundamental features as the ultimate fact. And I do really think that's a cop-out. Okay, as I said, the universe just seems like an awfully complicated state of affairs. There's an awful lot out there to just accept it as a brute fact. It was cop-out. Well, anyway, however much it worked for him, it all got thrown out the window with the Big Bang Theory, which teaches that the universe had a beginning, had a start, that it didn't always exist. And because of that, Flew had to abandon his previous position, of the universe always existing, that it had a beginning, and so he just suddenly had to throw that out. And he found the argument. Funny, my wife just emailed me just the other day. She said you'd find that interesting. This is an argument that Stephen Hawking and some others have put out, that the universe was created out of nothing. It was created out of nothing. And Flew found the argument that the universe was created out of nothing. Well, he really just couldn't buy into that. Okay, he found that a little silly. In fact, there's a book that I read a while back book by Bill Bryson called A Short History of Nearly Everything. Well, anybody's going to write a short history of nearly everything, it's going to be a pretty bad book, and it was, even though it made the New York Times bestseller list. But, I read it, and it was worse than I thought. But I want to read you this line, because this line made it worth reading the book, okay? He goes, quote, "It seems impossible that you could get something from nothing, but the fact that there was once nothing, but now there is a universe, is evident proof that you can." Okay? Now, to put it mildly, that is, I don't know about to you, but to me, that is as ludicrous as it sounds. Okay? Talk about assuming what you're trying to prove, assuming what you're trying, it's ludicrous, for him to sit there and say, how do you know there was nothing? Again, it seems impossible that you could get something from nothing, but the fact that there was once nothing, but now there's a universe is evidence proof that you can. Well, Flew was too smart to buy into that. And any wonder either. I mean, come on. When nothing, that which by definition does not exist, that is posited instead of God as the creative force behind the creation of the universe, one has to wonder about the logic of those people looking for something, anything, even nothing, as opposed to God as the source of existence. God, the foundation of all existence, is replaced by nothing, the negation of all existence. That's the argument they use. Makes me think of a line from Tennyson. And Tennyson used this line to kind of attack Christianity, but I think it works the other way, where Tennyson says, believing where we cannot prove. I think, though aimed at Christian believers, missed its mark entirely. Okay, that was one thing for Flew. Okay, the idea that the universe, the Big Bang, had a beginning. Now, some argue that the Big Bang isn't true. I personally don't have a problem with the Big Bang. Okay, if it turns out it's not true, doesn't bother me one way or the other. It makes the most sense to me for other reasons. But anyway, there was another reason now as well. Despite pronouncements of its death, after a long and distinguished history, the argument from design still rages today. The argument from design still rages. Some claim that the philosopher David Hume, who died in 1776, they claim he had demolished the argument from design in his book, Dialogue Concerning Natural Religions. He wrote this dialogue between two people talking, and one trying to show the argument that, from design there is no argument, that's no proof for God. Some people claim he destroyed they call it the teleological argument, the argument from God. And I would argue that David Hume did no such thing. I've read the book, and I didn't come away impressed one way or the other. What Hume did was, he was good at taking, I don't know how you do this. Let's try to quantify this for a minute. Let's say the argument from the design, I'm throwing out the number hypothetically. Let's say it's 95% good, okay? And so you got the 5%, where it's not absolute proof. If it was absolute proof, he wouldn't be having this discussion. So you got the 5%, and he went in and did a very good job in trying to, explicate the 5%, the little bit of doubt in there, okay? He did a pretty good job on that, as good as you can. But in the end, listen to what he's forced to admit. Okay, this is considered the best polemic that has endured for centuries against the argument from design. And in this book, written in the 1700s, listen to what Hume says. He has to admit, Okay, remember, this is a guy in the 1700s. This is before doctors thought, hey, maybe it's a good idea I wash my hands before I go cut somebody's limb off. Okay? They had no idea of like germ theory back then. They had no idea of the things that we know now. And then yet he admits, he talks about, the incredible design in nature. And he said that matter may contain the source or spring of order originally within itself, that the several elements from an internal unknown cause may fall into the most exquisite arrangement. So what is he doing there? All he's doing is pushing the argument back. That's all. May I humbly ask, where did matter get the information and ability to organize itself into this exquisite arrangement that he talked about? Well, back then, their concept of an exquisite arrangement is crude. It's in the Pleistocene era compared to our understanding of the complexity today. So even if matter had in it the ability to arrange itself into this, where did that come from? Where it's come from? It's easier to imagine, I think. Suppose you took a pile of ink and you took a pile of paper, and then think there's something inherent in the ink and in the paper, some internal unknown what did he use? Some internal unknown, what was the word? Some internal unknown cause. Oh, that's deep. Some internal unknown cause in the ink and in the paper that allowed it of itself to create, Tolstoy's War and Peace. Okay? Something in the ink and in the paper just left to itself, you put it together, and voila, there's War and Peace by Tolstoy. I can imagine that as easily as I can imagine carbon, water, proteins organizing themselves into a single cell, much less the process that led to Albert Einstein's brain. Okay? Now, of course, science claims that they have given the answer. Science claims that they have the answer to how the carbon and the water and the proteins could lead to Einstein's brain. And that is what they claim is random mutation and natural selection. Okay? Now, this isn't the time. I don't want to start debating neo-Darwinism. I don't want to start debating Darwinism in regards to the question of God's existence. But I think science has become, with that, a two-edged sword. And with the sharpest edge, I think, cutting against evolution or atheistic evolution. Because think about this. Think about this for a minute. While scientists debate how or even if random mutation could have created the complexity of life, while that is hotly debated, could it have done it? How it did it? That's hotly debated. Could it created the complexity of life, or how could it created the complexity of life? But what is not debated at all, what is not an issue at all, is the complexity itself. Okay? Nobody's debating the complexity. Okay? And here's sort of the irony. Which I don't think should be missed. Because the more complexity science finds in life, and oh my goodness, do you have an idea? A single cell wall? You take a simple amoeba, a cell wall of an amoeba, the complexity and stuff that goes on in there, they describe them as like complex factories. And we're just talking the cell wall. We're not getting into anything else. But the irony is, the more complexity science finds in life, the less likely the means that science claims for its origins becomes. Can you see the point? It gets more and more complex, and the more and more complexity they find, the less likely is this idea that it arose by chance. Because they're saying it all came by chance, nothing planned it. So it's kind of ironic. The more complexity they find, the less the less likely their argument for how it arose becomes. In fact, such complexity was the second factor that helped convert Flew, that helped convert Anthony Flew, the world's most notorious atheist. It just got him. He said, there's just no way this could have come by chance. In fact, he even quoted, at one point, he admitted that the complexity of life makes the chance origins of our universe. He used the word impossible. In fact, he quoted a Nobel Prize-winning physiologist. In the book, he quoted this guy as saying, we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance. Okay? So they said they're choosing to believe the impossible. Now, some people aren't ready to do that. So they postulate the improbable instead. See, they admit that the complexity of life makes its chance origins in our universe unlikely, or, to quote this one guy, impossible. So some cosmologists have come up with an alternate theory, that there are many universes out there, okay? And perhaps even an infinite number of universes. The idea being, all right, look, it's not very likely. The odds are pretty much impossible against life starting by chance in our one universe. So let's just postulate an infinite number of universes. You got an infinite number of universes, and then maybe the chance of one of these universes being what they call biophilic, friendly to life, greatly increases. I mean, who needs even one God when an infinite number of universes, of which there's not the slightest proof, experimental proof. There's a lot of hypotheses and a lot of mathematical formulas, but no proof. Who needs one God when an infinite number of universes will do instead? And they call this the multiverse theory. And let's just assume for a minute that there was a shred of evidence for multiple universes, okay? Let's say there's evidence for 1 million universes or an infinite number of universes. It only pushes the argument back a little further, as did Hume. Can you see the point? That doesn't solve anything. An infinite number of universes simply makes the question of their origin infinitely more pressing than does the existence of one universe. Can you see the point? Where did our one universe come from without a creator? So now they got an infinite number of them. Well, it seems like that makes the problem infinitely more complex than just one. So, it's funny. Look at the extremes here that people are going to try to get away from a God. Life arises either from nothing or from an infinite number of universes. Okay, I don't know. Wouldn't a supernatural creator be a more reasonable explanation than either of the others? Doesn't that seem a little bit more reasonable than the other two? Well, probably the world's most famous atheist, Oxford zoologist Richard Dawkins. You've heard of Dawkins and his book, The God Delusion. I've read all these new atheists. Most of them aren't that good. Dawkins is pretty good. He's pretty funny. The God Delusion is a hilarious. It is a funny book. It doesn't bother me any. I think his arguments are asinine from beginning to end. But if you want to read an amusing book by an intelligent guy who's trying to promote atheism, The God Delusion is a fun book to read. Okay, but in The God Delusion, his argument on design was really weak. And the basic motif of his book, it comes back over and over again, is, well, who created God? Who created God? In other words, he goes like this: a designer God cannot be used to explain organized complexity, because any God capable of designing anything would have to be complex enough to demand the same kind of explanation in his own right. Okay, see what he's doing? It's all right, you're saying this microphone demands complexity. It demands a creator. Well, if the creator has got to be more complex than the microphone, then obviously if it's more complex than that, then that would need a creator. But he's missing the whole point entirely. But a God, an eternal God, by definition doesn't have a creator. He is the creator. A caused universe and all that's in it, in contrast, does need a creator. Dawkins is so confined by naturalism, he can't understand the qualitative difference between what is made and the maker. They're two different things completely. I mean, everything from cell membrane physiology to a grapefruit to human sexuality make God so much more likely the explanation for their functionality, beauty, and purpose than does any explanation predicated on a chance confluence of particles and forces that in and of themselves require a source outside of them, greater than them, and interior to them. And who else, what else would that be? What else logically could that be other than a creator God? And then you think about it too. What is more likely to have been uncaused? Think about it. Something had to have been uncaused that started all this, okay? If you don't believe in an infinite universe, what is most likely to have been uncaused? God, an eternal God, or the universe? Okay? Which most likely? Answer to me seems obvious. Now then there's more. You know, there's a Ukrainian proverb that says, when you leave your house in Donetsk, bring a knife in case you run into somebody you know. Okay? Now, whatever that might say about the wonderful folks in the town of Donetsk, it does say something about humanity, that we possess moral characteristics. I mean, we are moral beings. We have moral concepts. We have concepts of right and wrong, good and evil. But where do they come from? How could the fundamental elements of existence, they've got it broken down, the subatomic world, they got everything into quarks, protons and neutrons and all that. They say they're broken down into these things called quarks, charm quarks, strange quarks, up quarks, down quarks, quarks and electrons, and photons. All these amoral things in and of themselves, they emerge not only into life, but into consciousness, into a consciousness that's conflicted with moral attributes. That seems just absurd in and of itself to think, how could this amoral universe ultimately create moral beings? And then you got a whole question too. It's funny, a while back I read this book. My wife picked it up for me. It's called Confessions of a Philosopher by a fellow named Brian McGee. And Brian McGee is a British writer. He's a music critic, author, member of Parliament, written a number of books on philosophy, and he had everything going for him in his life. And he talked about in his life, he said, I've got great work. He said, I've had exhilarating love affairs. He says, I was a member of Parliament. He had money. He had a great education. He said he had everything going for him in life. And then he said when he was in his 30s, it suddenly struck him. It suddenly struck him that he was going to die. And that everybody he knew was going to die. And anybody who ever remembered anything he ever accomplished was going to die. And every memory of anything he had ever done, whether he became prime minister, whether he invented a cure for cancer, no matter what he did, everything he did, he said in the end, they were all going to die. And he said that in the end, it was doomed to nullity. And quote, there was no meaning in any of it. no point in any of it, and that in the end, everything was nothing. And he was right. I mean, if you don't believe in God, and if we know that science says sooner or later the universe is just going to, according to science, the universe, they say, it's going to keep expanding, and then eventually all the era of light is going to be over, all the stars are going to burn out. That's one theory, if it keeps expanding. The other theory, they say the force of gravity is going to push everything back in, and the whole universe is going to get crunched down to the size of a fist. I mean, where's that going to leave you and anything you've ever done when the whole universe is crunched down to the size of a fist? It's nothing. There's nothing. It all ultimately comes to nothingness. And then yet you think about it. In the end, if he's right, then what could it all mean? If you're going to be dead and everybody you know is going to be dead and every memory of you is going to be dead and this planet's going to be destroyed and there's no consciousness to ever remember anything at all, what could it possibly mean? And yet you think about it, it just doesn't seem logical. I mean, your thumb has a purpose. Your ear has a purpose. Your heart has a purpose. The sun has a purpose. And all these and all these other purposes so finely and majestically woven together culminate ultimately in the big picture into purposelessness. It's almost like taking a bunch of positive integers, adding them up, and getting a negative number. Doesn't make sense. If the universe and all consciousness in it is doomed to extinction, then our existence has no purpose. A conclusion that contradicts everything about that existence itself, which from the cellular level outward screams with purposefulness. Makes me think of a line of a poet, Auden, W.H. Auden. He said, "Nothing can save us that is possible. We who must die demand a miracle." It's pretty heavy. Nothing that can save us is possible. We who must die demand a miracle. And the miracle demands deity, which leads back to Lewis's dilemma, which I talked about in the beginning. As his atheist friend said, powerful evidence existed for the historicity of the Gospels, which includes the miracle of Christ's resurrection. I talked about that earlier. Just as any discovery of one black swan annuls any worldview that says all swans are white, even one such miracle annuls any worldview that says no miracles can occur. Now, of course, proving those miracles is another matter. Okay, proving the miracles is another matter. But for those who believe in them or who've experienced the miraculous for themselves, evidence for God's existence becomes lodged, at least partly in places where, like with music, using logic alone is trying to, apply greasy pliers to a soft layer glitch. You know what I'm saying? There is the whole element where belief in God transcends all the logic and reason, no matter how good the logic and reason is. See, to a certain degree, I admit on all this. I cheat. I believe all these arguments, and I think they're powerful. But I've also had some experiences that the only rational, logical way to explain it is a God. Okay? So you take all this and then you add that as well. I can't explain it any other way other than being a God. Okay? I mean, we have powerful evidence. We got powerful evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Then you got those Bible prophecies. My goodness, those Bible prophecies alone demand a God as the most logical explanation for them. Prophecies that are in some cases as rooted, as firm, and as broad, as unchangeable as world history itself. Think about, if those of you who heard my conversion story, I was converted totally on an experience. Nothing logical, nothing rational, nothing reasonable. I didn't have any of this stuff. It was totally total mystical stuff. And then the next day, somebody gave me, I had my first Bible study. That guy in the health food store that gave me the Great Controversy when I was on my way to get the book on, when I was having those occult experiences. And they gave me a Bible study on Daniel 2. And I remember we got done with that study and I just started weeping because I thought it's all true. Because here is Daniel 2. What firmer, broader foundation could God give us to build a logical reason for our faith than the history of the world? Okay, you know what I'm saying? I mean, Daniel 2, Babylon came and went, Medo Persia, Greece, Rome, you got all that. As human beings stuck here on earth, what firmer, broader foundation could we have than the history of the world? And you can't change it because it's locked in the past. So you see what I'm saying? You want something logical. What could be more broader and logical and more firm of a foundation for faith than something rooted in world history, as broad as the world and as immovable in the past? So we've been very good reasons. So in the end, we've got good reasons, not foolproof reasons, but nothing's foolproof. If later I do that sermon on math problem, I'll show you that not even math is foolproof. But so what? What in life is foolproof? What is life? My wife says I read too much philosophy, and I joke with her, how do I know I even exist? She says, well, I don't know if you exist, but I know your laundry sure does. So what do we got here? What do we got? It's not full. I admit, if it wasn't full, we need faith, if there wasn't faith. But it's not an unintelligent faith. First, God is, I think, the best explanation for the universe. The only way you can really logically, quote logically, you can get around some sort of supernatural creator is to argue that nothing created the universe. Okay? Because if you got an infinite number of universes or you got the Big Bang, you got all of that. I mean, the Big Bang requires a big you-know-whatter, okay? I'm not going to say it, okay? The Big Bang, there's an awful lot of math, an awful lot of physics, an awful lot of science in Big Bang cosmogony, okay? As Stephen Hawking once said, who breathed fire in the equations? Even the Big Bang doesn't answer a thing. Certainly doesn't negate the need for a God. If you really want, you got an infinite number of universes, fine. I think the only logical way to get away from a creator is to argue that nothing created the universe. And I'm sorry if that is as absurd as it sounds. It's just as absurd to say nothing. That's your only alternative. That's pretty ridiculous. And I think, second, a creator, an intelligent designer, seems to be the most logical explanation for the complexity and design we see in the world today. A while back, I went over to England, and I just love England. I mean, I go to England almost much as I go to, this is like my 5th trip to South Africa. And I think my wife thinks I got a girlfriend here or something, because I'm always coming here. Because I go to England a lot, too. So she says, well, you got a girlfriend over there, too. No, I'm just kidding. But I was over in Cambridge. And like Cambridge, to me, is like Mecca. I mean, Cambridge, there's where Isaac Newton's office was, and this is where Ludwig Wittgenstein's office was. And you walk by a bar, and they said, in this bar, Crick and Watson, I think they were drunk or on pot, but they came up with the double helix model for the DNA, and so on. But Crick, one of the guys who the DNA helix, Crick was an adamant atheist, an adamant, radical, in-your-face atheist. But Crick was convinced, that life was too complicated to have arisen by chance. In the number of billions of years they speculate that the universe was around. When it's 3 billion, then somebody does something else, and I got the decimal place wrong. It's 13 billion, or missed this number here, it's 20 billion. I don't know how they work it. He was convinced, though, it's too complicated to have occurred by chance. So he had his own theory. And this is hilarious, because I read it in a secular magazine. And the guy was kind of a little bit disturbed, because Crick believed that aliens Okay? I'm serious. Aliens came in flying saucers and came down and seeded life on Earth. And that's how life got started on Earth. And then it evolved, okay? Because he just knew it was too complicated to have started by chance in the length of time they say. So you read the secular author going, one of our 20th century's greatest scientists, Nobel Prize winning scientist, has to say that aliens came in flying saucers and seeded life on Earth. Okay, that's what they were forced to resort to try to get away from God. Well, I'm sorry, I just think the idea of a creator God makes a whole lot more sense. And then you got the whole question of morality. The whole question, how do amoral beings, I use an example one time. I'll take one for me as a Jew. Suppose the Nazis won the war. Okay? The Nazis won the war. And suppose under Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine, they convinced every human being that anybody with 1/4 Jewish blood needed to be executed. Infants, grandmothers, didn't matter. You had one Jewish grandparent, you deserved to be dead. Now, morality arises from either one or two places. Okay? If there is no God, okay, if there is no transcendent consciousness, then where does morality come from? Where is the only place it could come from? You tell me. If there is, on earth, if there is no transcendent God, where does morality come from? From humans. Okay? If it doesn't come from above, if it only comes from humans. So, every human being in the world is convinced that anybody with 1/4 Jewish blood needs to be just gassed and burned. Okay? If there is no morality from above, then how could that be wrong? Okay? How could that be wrong? If there is no transcendence, if there is no God, and morality comes purely from, if morality is like cakewalk jazz, okay, or impressionist painting, human concoctions, then if everybody believes that it's right for anybody with 1/4 Jewish blood to be killed, then it's got to be right. And if you're not comfortable with that, which I would assume most people, unless we got some Nazis here, if you're not comfortable with that, then what is the only other alternative? Would have to be something above. And that is not a foolproof argument for the existence of God, but still, it's an argument for the existence of God. And then finally, or what comes down to ultimately again, if there is no God and we're here purely by chance, then sooner or later, we're all going to be gone, and everybody we know is going to be gone, and every remembrance of us is going to be gone, and every consciousness and everything we've ever done, everything we've ever thought, any influence we've ever had, anything with anything, it's all going to be vanished, and there's going to be no one's going to remember it, and it's going to die in what philosopher Bertrand Russell once called the cosmic heat death of the end of the universe. And I don't know if you don't, the fact that it's not just that it's just uncomfortable, that's irrelevant. It just doesn't seem logical because there's too much purpose. You see what I'm saying? There's too much purpose everywhere for all this purposeness then to end in ultimate purposeless. And then you got the prophecies of the Bible and on, and if you study those prophecies, I just don't know how they could be explained in any other way other than the existence of a God who could foretell the future. Here are some of the reasons why I believe in God. In the end, I contend that belief in God is the most logical, rational, and reasonable explanation for the reality we find ourselves in. Foolproof? As I said, no, it's not foolproof. But again, I don't know anything in life that is foolproof. But again, nothing is. And I want to end with these verses. But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. He who comes to God must believe that he is. And as I have tried to show, we have good reasons, logical reasons, for believing he indeed is. And what I want to do on my next talk, though, this is all fine. And these arguments, and these are all good, logical, rational arguments. But I didn't touch, which is the biggest problem of all, when you deal with the existence of God, at least the God that we believe in, and that is the question of evil and suffering. And we'll deal with that in the next talk. Let's pray. Again, Father, I just thank you for the reasons you've given us. We don't have to believe blindly. We have reasons for faith. We've all got questions. We've all got struggles. We've all got problems. But I thank you that we can have reasons to cling and to believe in what we don't fully understand. Help us to cling to those reasons, to cling to faith with all our heart and soul. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.